Who doesn't love a good fight scene, right? I mean, most of us don't really want to be in an actual fight, but we love fantasizing about them and watching them, both in movies and in real life. There's definitely something raw, primal, and alluring that's drawn humans to violence for pretty much as far back as recorded history can show us. So let's take a look at 3 reasons why people love to watch fight scenes. The first reason we love fight scenes could be our survival instincts, way back from our caveman days of hunting prey and avoiding predators. You know that surge of adrenaline and that rush of excitement you feel when you're involved in a dangerous situation, or even are just witnessing one? Over the course of human evolution, that fight or flight response has allowed our species to survive by letting us know when to run from danger and when to face it head on. Because it's such an ingrained human response, we can't help but feel a deep emotional reaction by even just witnessing these dangerous situations. We probably all have memories from the school playground of a couple kids who got into a little scuffle, and before you know it, there's a crowd of 20 other kids surrounding them, yelling, "Fight, fight, fight." We know that violence is wrong, and we know that somebody is likely to get hurt or in trouble, but that doesn't matter. Most of us still love watching it. Another reason we love fight scenes is that humans are competitive by nature. We really like to demonstrate our dominance and superiority over others in any way possible, whether intellectual or physical. Nobody wants to be the slowest person in a race, get the lowest grade on a test, or lift the lightest amount of weight in the gym. We are hardwired to compete with our fellow man in almost every way, and even if you don't want to actually get into a fight yourself, I'm betting that you still enjoy cheering for other people as they go toe-to-toe. Which brings me to the third reason we love fight scenes. Perhaps we all just imagine ourselves as the hero of the fight, even if it's not us actually doing the fighting. Maybe all of our built-up anger and frustrations from daily life becomes the target of the hero's punches and kicks, as we picture ourselves in the boxing ring or the back alley, beating the heck out of somebody stupid enough to think that they could actually take us down. Maybe living vicariously through our fight scene heroes lets us momentarily live the dream of escaping our troubles and becoming a hero ourselves. Whatever the reason, fight scenes are awesome. Almost everyone loves them, and they provide some of the most exciting scenes and highlights in our favorite movies. In the next lesson, we're going to take a look at the role of character development and story in creating exciting action and fight scenes. Alright, see you in a bit. An important component in any narrative piece is character development. Fight scenes are no different. So what is character development? Character development is simply the process where the audience gets to know the characters in a film. As we watch these characters develop and change over time, we refer to that as the character arc. So what's this have to do with a fight scene? Well, without knowing a bit about the characters in the fight, you're basically just watching a couple of guys pummeling each other for no reason. The trick is to tell the audience some of the details about the fighter before it starts, so that way they can begin to understand why the fight is happening in the first place and what's at stake. While much of this story setup is dependent on the writers and the script of the film that you're editing, it's important for you as an editor to be aware of these elements and how they can impact the end result of something like a fight scene. You could edit the coolest, most exciting fight scene in the world, but if you don't have your character and story points nailed down, it won't be the best it can be, because the audience just won't respond to it on an emotional level. Often, this is described as having a lot of flash with no substance, and that's definitely not what we're looking to create here. So, there are 3 fight scene story elements that should be established before the fight actually begins. First, we'll need character introductions. Second, we need believable motivations. And third, we need stakes. Let's take a deeper look at each of these story elements. First, we have the character introductions. Who are these characters? This doesn't just refer to what their names are. As a matter of fact, many times their names are actually the least important pieces of information to give the audience. More importantly, we want the viewer to know a bit about each character's personality and their backstory. Are they the average-looking office worker with a hidden temper? Are they a hardened street thug looking for trouble? Maybe they're a martial arts expert who thinks that they're unbeatable. Often, the character introductions will be the time when the viewer decides who they'll be cheering for in the film, also known as the protagonist. All of this information ensures that the viewer will feel some sort of emotional connection to the participants in the fight, which is crucial for creating something exciting and memorable. Next, we'll want to make sure that there are believable motivations for the fight. A fight that begins for non-existent or contrived reasons is going to feel boring and gratuitous. There needs to be some sort of catalyst or driver that initiates the fight. Here are some basic examples of good motivations for a fight. Street crime, such as an attempted mugging or kidnapping, are always good motivators for a fight. Arguments are very natural ways to lead into a fight, and bully situations are also great. A fight that arises out of a bully situation is a good way to begin your character's arc from a potentially weak underdog who is always getting picked on into someone who will eventually become our hero later in the film. Alright, so the third fight scene story element we need to talk about are the stakes, or the consequences of the fight. What could the character gain if he's successful? What could he lose if he's not? Sometimes the stakes of a fight are life and death, in which case the fight should usually be edited in a way that shows the seriousness of the situation. Plenty of facial reactions showing fear or concern, and appropriate music should be used. Other times, the stakes are a bit lower. Maybe the fight is between two guys fighting over the same girl. Obviously, the stakes of the fight might seem important to the characters in the film, but the audience knows that this situation is less serious. Whatever the potential consequences of a particular fight happen to be, it's important to establish them before the fight begins. By providing this information, it'll help calibrate the audience's view of the fight and let them know whether or not to view it with a bit of comic levity or with the intensity of a life or death situation. By managing the viewer's expectations ahead of time, we can prepare them for what they're about to watch, so they'll understand why the music might be very serious and dramatic, or why the edits are quick and comical with almost cartoon-like sound effects. Without establishing this mood ahead of time with character and story development, the editing techniques used in a fight might seem out of place or strange, no matter how well you edit the fight itself. So in this lesson, we talked about the importance of character and story development as they relate to fight scenes. We discussed the role of character introductions before a fight in establishing a bit of backstory and helping the viewer to determine who the protagonists and antagonists are. Next, we looked at creating believable motivations for the fight. Why are the characters about to enter into a physical confrontation? What led to this point? Does it make sense? Last, we talked about the stakes. The consequences. What's on the line here? Could someone die? Does the fate of all mankind hang in the balance? Is there $1 million in prize money? Or maybe the stakes are smaller, and the only real negative outcome, if our hero lost, might be that he just walked away embarrassed. The audience should know what's on the line in a fight. By giving the audience all this character and story information, they'll become more invested in the outcome of your fight scene, and the well-being of your characters involved, which makes the scene infinitely more exciting and memorable. You could do a great job editing together amazing punches and kicks and add a ton of professional sound design and music, but without adding a bit of character development and story points, nobody's going to care who wins or loses, and that makes for a pretty boring fight scene to watch. In the next lesson, we'll look at the techniques used in professional fight choreography and learn how they can help or hurt us when trying to create a unique and believable fight scene. See you in a bit. So we've already talked about how good writing and character development contribute to a great fight scene. But what about the process of making the fight itself? That's where fight choreography comes in. There could be hundreds of hours of video and countless books written about how to choreograph a fight scene, but for our purposes as editors, I'm going to keep it pretty brief. When you have the pleasure of working with well-choreographed fight footage, you'll notice a few things going on. First, the fight will appear natural, like it's happening right in front of the viewer's eyes. It should not appear overly rehearsed or forced, and the events should look realistic and unscripted. Second, it'll seem to have a spontaneous energy to it without looking sloppy, and will have a sense of unpredictability. The viewer should not feel like they necessarily know the outcome of the fight, and they'll be kept interested in waiting to see what happens next. Third, you'll see stylized techniques. In a real fight, most techniques are designed to be quick, powerful, and effective. They're meant to catch their opponent off guard. If a movie fight scene were designed with these exact same moves, the audience would miss a lot of the action. The moves would be too quick to register. Since they're designed to catch their opponent off guard and unaware, they'd probably do the same to the viewer, who might not see the quick move that just happened. Real fighters are taught not to telegraph their punches and kicks, and give away the fact that they're about to attack their enemy. But in movie fight scenes, it's the exact opposite. A little wind-up, like pulling an arm back or cocking a leg, will cue the viewer to keep watching because something's about to happen. Good fight scene choreography should be stylized and exaggerated in a way that lends itself well to being captured by a camera and understood by a viewer. That means that moves will often be less efficient and direct than their real-life counterparts, and they'll often end up taking more of an arcing, sweeping movement to be seen easily by both the camera lens and the human eye, such as a right hook or a spinning kick. Inexperienced fight choreographers might not understand this, and they might not design the fight with the viewer in mind. As editors, it's our job to understand that what is actually happening in a movie fight doesn't really matter if the viewer can't see it. The fourth mark of a well-choreographed fight scene is to have little to no misses. In the world of fight choreography, a miss is defined as a punch or a kick that appears to miss its intended target. This could either be due to sloppy choreography or poorly chosen camera angles. Unfortunately, a lot of amateur fight scenes have problems with this. As an editor, just make sure that if you're going to use a punch or a kick, it looks like it's actually happening. Or, at the very least, use multiple angles of the attack when you're editing so that you can cut away from one angle before it starts to look fake, and finish the movement from another angle. Fifth, part of good fight choreography is making sure that the actors show realistic emotion and reactions to the events in a fight. During the editing process, you'll find it invaluable to be able to include shots of characters wincing in pain as they're hit, or reacting in fear as they're about to be. Good fight choreographers and directors will make sure that the actors are demonstrating some level of emotional response throughout the fight, and with any luck, it'll be captured on film by the camera operator. Make sure you take advantage of these facial expressions and reactions when you're editing your fight scene. By doing this, you'll make sure that the fight retains an emotional and human component that viewers are going to relate to as they watch. Well-choreographed fights will also use a variety of reactions to the various attacks, depending on the intended strength of the attack and the message that you're trying to get across. If a character reacted the same way to every punch and kick, not only would it be repetitive and boring, but it also wouldn't make much sense. Each attack from an opponent will likely have a different amount of force from the previous one, and it'll probably strike a different part of the other person's body. The reactions should take all of this into account to create realistic fight scene choreography. Another way that quality choreography and good planning can improve a fight scene is by incorporating moves that are unique and interesting. Everyone's seen two boxers trading punches, but that can get a bit tedious. The most interesting fight scenes make use of creative combinations of hits, grabs, blocks, and dodges. To add even more uniqueness and excitement to fight scenes, you'll often see weapons and props being used within the scene, many times in a creative way. For example, in The Bourne Identity, there's a great scene where Jason Bourne, played by Matt Damon, is fighting a hired hitman named Desh. In this scene, Bourne grabs a ballpoint pen from the desk, removes the cap, and expertly uses it like a knife to stab his enemy. That's the type of thing that can set a fight scene apart from every other one. Things you'll remember because you've never seen them done before. As an editor, keep an eye out for interesting moves and attacks in the fight, and be sure to highlight them during the editing process. So, in this lesson, we learned that good fight choreography will help the fight to appear natural. The fights should have a spontaneous energy to them and keep the viewer intrigued. Stylized techniques will be used to help the audience understand what's happening and to be excited by it. Faked punches and kicks will appear convincing and without misses, or we should edit them to fix those issues. The scene will have human emotion and reactions to the events of the fight. And last, interesting moves can be used to make the fight both unique and memorable for the viewer. In the next lesson, we'll take a look at some of the cinematography techniques used to film a fight scene. See you in a bit. Just like with choreography, the role of cinematography in a fight scene contains far more information than can be included within this one lesson. There's simply way too much to cover. However, I'd like to discuss 4 important techniques you'll see filmmakers using as you work with footage from various fight scenes. Many filmmakers will use a long lens on their cameras to compress the space between the fighters and help the fake punches and kicks look more realistic, like they're actually making contact. Look at these 2 example photos. The photo on the left was shot with a 24mm lens, which is considered relatively short or wide angle. The photo on the right was shot with a 91mm lens, which is considered relatively long or tight. You can see that the longer lens gives the illusion that the rear candle is closer to the front candle than it actually is. The space between them is essentially compressed. To enhance the impression that the combatants are landing real blows, many filmmakers will use this trick and work with a long lens on their camera. With a longer focal length, the camera is physically moved back a bit from the action and then zoomed in. Using a long lens, a punch can pass a few inches in front of the victim's head, but from the camera's point of view, it'll appear extremely close. This allows actors to perform their fights more safely, while still retaining the realism and believability of the choreography. Another common thing you'll notice about many fight scenes is that the fights aren't shot from a completely profile angle. Shooting a fight in a side or profile view might be okay if the fighters are actually trained martial artists who are really making contact with each other, or at least are coming extremely close. In these cases, it's a fine camera angle to use, and it really shows the viewer the level of skill possessed by the fighters. Many Eastern martial arts films from China and Hong Kong will use wider shots, as many of their stars are actually experienced martial artists. However, in most Western fight scenes, when there's a good amount of visual trickery going on to convince the viewer that the blows are making contact, and that the actors really know how to fight, a profile angle accentuates the distance between the characters, and the fact that the hits aren't actually making contact becomes pretty obvious. Shots from behind the characters or over the shoulder at various angles tends to give the impression that they're closer together and that the fight that you're watching is a real one. Another thing you'll notice when editing a lot of fight scenes is that many filmmakers will first try to capture the entire fight scene in a continuous wide master shot. Not only does this ensure that you have coverage on the entire fight from this angle, but it can also be extremely useful during the editing process. As with master shots in most scenes, when you have a master shot in a fight, you're able to really see how the events of the fight are supposed to unfold. It gives you a great visual roadmap of the choreography that can help while cutting together the various angles you'll ultimately be using on the final piece. Also, having a full scene master shot can sometimes save you when you're editing, and you find yourself needing to re-establish the fight scene, either to help clarify the locations of the characters within the scene, or simply to give the viewer a bit of rest between the flurry of quick edits and tight shots that compose the majority of most fight scenes. The last thing I'll say about fight scene cinematography is that insert shots and close-ups are your friend. As an editor, you'll definitely appreciate it when filmmakers take the time to capture close-ups of things like a fist making contact with the flesh of somebody's face, a punch landing on somebody's rib cage, bystanders reacting in shock, and the look on fighters' faces as they wince in pain after being hit. All these elements add a ton of visual interest and relevant information in a fight scene, and they help the viewer keep track of what's going on in the midst of all the chaos. These types of shots will also help you, the editor, to cut around the scene by using these types of shots as the connective tissue between the other angles on the fight. So, in this lesson, we learned 4 secrets of fight scene cinematography. The first is that long lenses can be used to compress space and make punches and kicks appear more realistic. Second, we learned that many shots are not filmed in profile angle if the actors don't actually know how to fight. Most of the time, it's just asking for trouble unless you're dealing with real martial arts experts. Third, we learned that master shots are great for establishing the setting of your fight scene and for serving as an editor's cheat sheet as far as how the fight's supposed to flow. And fourth, we learned that insert shots and close-ups are very useful to show specific details of the fight, such as weapons being drawn and complicated or important martial arts moves. In the next section, we'll take a look at some picture editing tips that'll help you when editing your own fight scene later in the course. See you in a bit. In this section, we're going to look at some of the most useful strategies and techniques related to the picture editing portion of cutting a fight scene. To be clear, by picture editing, I'm referring only to the video element, not the audio. We'll talk about sound design and music editing for fight scenes in the next section. Please keep in mind that all these techniques can be applied to almost any type of action scene that you find yourself working on. These are core editing skills and tips that will serve you well on a lot of different projects. So, as you might expect, editing a fight scene requires you to be adept at most of the fundamental editing skills, such as cutting on movement, developing a rhythm, paying attention to continuity, and other basic techniques. Here are 4 picture editing techniques that you'll find particularly useful while editing a fight scene. Matching motion, letting the scene breathe, increasing the impacts, and using speed effects. Let's take a closer look at each technique. The first technique you'll be using a lot is matching motion. Matching motion can be done by cutting between alternating camera angles, or by varying the camera distance of shots during the course of an attack. First, let's take a look at what I mean by alternating camera angles. Generally in a fight, whenever an attack is initiated, you'll see it first from one angle, and then halfway through the motion of the attack, you'll be cutting to an opposite angle shot as the punch or kick lands. The function of this is to accomplish 3 main things. First, alternating camera angles will increase the pace of the scene. There will be certain times when you want to give the fight a bit more energy and a feeling of movement to it. By cutting between alternating angles, the fight will feel a bit more frenetic and the action will appear more exciting than if it was only shown from one angle. Second, you'll be able to smooth out the choreography. There's going to be many times when a punch, kick, or other attack might not look completely convincing or exciting when played from only one camera angle. However, when you play it from multiple angles, cutting in between them during the course of an actual attack, you'll be able to hide any misses and make sure the move looks completely realistic in the context of the scene. And third, by alternating camera angles during attacks in a fight scene, you'll be able to provide more information about the fight. From one angle, you'll be able to see the attacker as he approaches his opponent. You'll get at least a glimpse of his facial expression, and you'll get a feeling for his general pattern of movement and the intensity of the incoming attack. From the opposite angle, you'll be able to see the defender reacting to his opponent's attack as he either gets hit, dodges, blocks, or counters the attack. Matching motion with alternating camera angles is a very basic but vital component to the picture editing portion of cutting a fight scene, and you'll be using it a lot. Alright, so varying the camera distance between shots is also a good opportunity to match motion during a fight. Just like the alternating angles from one shot to the next allows you to add energy to the cut and provide more visual information, varying the camera distance allows you to add a bit more impact to the cut, and clearly show an attack landing and making powerful and substantial contact with the other fighter through the use of close-ups. So let's take a quick look at an example. We've looked at this scene before for a good example of alternating camera angles, but it also has a good example of varying camera distance. Here, you have a medium shot of a fighter as he begins to throw a punch. The camera angle is looking over the shoulder of the attacker towards his opponent. Now, as the punch gets closer to the face of the opponent, we cut to a close-up shot of the punch actually landing, and making contact with the other fighter's face. Both the first and second shot are from a similar camera angle, but the distance has been varied from one shot to the next. As long as the motion is matched across the cut, the edit will feel invisible and will add excitement and information to the scene. Another picture editing technique you'll need to use when cutting together a fight scene is learning how to let your scene breathe. So, what do I mean by breathe? Well, if we were watching a fight scene that was just non-stop punches, kicks, and attacks, we'd quickly become visually fatigued and experience sensory overload. It'll stop being fun and exciting, and we'll become immune and numb to what's going on. In order for the scene to keep our interest, we need to incorporate brief periods of rest throughout the scene. So, how do we do that? One way is to cut out to a wide, re-establishing shot. After a few back and forth exchanges between your combatants, you can cut back out to a wide shot to show the aftermath of a really brutal attack, or the fighters circling each other and getting ready for another series of attacks. Another way to let the scene breathe, as well as to provide a bit more of context and emotional feedback, is to use reaction shots. Reaction shots can be anything from footage of a crowd cheering to close-up shots of individual bystanders or friends looking on with concern, admiration, fear, or any other appropriate emotion. Seeing a shot of a woman gasping and putting her hand to her chest as her husband stumbles from a powerful punch is a great way to momentarily pause the action and let the viewer know that the hero might not be doing so well. Keep in mind that reaction shots can be used in the same way for all types of action scenes you might be cutting. Keeping the viewer in touch with the emotions of the characters in a film as they react to any sort of high-intensity moment will always improve your cut. The last way to let your scene breathe that I'm going to mention here is to allow your characters to speak some lines. Often, this will be incorporated into the script before the fight is even shot.
Who makes all these?
These lines can help develop the characters.
I do. And I practice with them 3 hours a day.
Add a bit of humor to the scene.
You need to find yourself a girl, mate.
Or provide important bits of story and plot information.
Or perhaps the reason you practice 3 hours a day is that you've already found one and are otherwise incapable of wooing said strumpet.
It'll also help you break up the constant stream of action. Using a combination of these types of momentary breaks in the fight is going to keep your viewer engaged in the scene. They're going to stay fully aware of what's happening and completely in touch with the emotional significance of each event during a fight, because they'll actually have time to process it. So here's another cool picture editing tip that you can use when editing your fight scene. In order to make the punches and kicks feel a bit snappier and more powerful, you can remove a frame or two right at the point of contact. So, just as a fist is contacting with the face of another guy, you can try removing one frame. This will give the illusion of a violent snap as the punch lands, and the recoil of the head will occur that much sooner and more quickly. This is also a great way to hide any sort of choreography issues where a faked punch might appear as a miss instead of an actual hit. Another good picture editing skill to keep in your arsenal for fight scene editing is the speed effect. Using slow motion and speed effects can enhance the drama of the scene, help attacks appear more powerful, highlight certain moves, and create some interesting variety and contrast in the pacing of the scene. So in this lesson, we learned a bunch of picture editing tips that we can use when editing a fight scene. We learned that matching motion between shots while varying camera angles and distances is a great way to add excitement and additional visual information to a cut. Then, we learned the benefit of letting the scene breathe through the use of wide shots, reactions, and character dialogue. We also looked at a great way to increase the impact of a punch or kick by removing 1 or 2 frames at the point of contact. And last, we discussed some of the benefits to both fast and slow motion effects in a fight scene. Don't worry if you feel a little overwhelmed by all these techniques and suggestions. We'll be going over all of them step by step in detail when we begin the actual editing portion of the fight scene later in this course. For now, just be aware that there's a lot of useful picture editing tricks that you can use to enhance your fight scene and give it a little extra polish and flair. In the next section, we'll discuss some cool sound editing tips and techniques. See you in a bit. Sound plays an important role when it comes to editing a fight scene. Depending on your choice of music and sound design, you can set the tone of the scene from something that feels frightening and dangerous, to gritty and realistic, to lighthearted and comical. There's a wide range of choices you need to consider when planning your sound editing strategy for any action scene. They should all really be decided on up front and be largely based on the type of movie you're working on and the context of the particular fight within the film. When approaching a fight scene, you'll have some decisions to make before you even start editing. First, you need to decide on the overall tone. Next, you'll need to decide on the overall style. First, let's look at tone. So, what's the tone of your fight scene? The tone refers to the general mood and atmosphere in which the fight takes place. Is it serious, like something from the Rocky films?
Come on, Tom.
Is it frightening and dangerous, like something from A History of Violence?
Or is it comical, like something from Happy Gilmore? Or maybe it's fun, like something from Pirates of the Caribbean. The tone of your fight will affect your sound editing process as well as your music choices, so it should all typically be decided on up front before you begin the actual editing. Things like music selections, types of sound effects, and sound editing techniques will all be affected by this choice. Next, you need to think about the style of your scene. Style is different from the tone. Does your fight scene aspire to be very realistic and natural, with real-world sound effects and minimal editorial trickery? Or will your fight scene use more stylized techniques like slow motion, mid-fight flashbacks, and heavy sound design? Stylized and flashy scenes will typically require a bit more in the way of advanced sound editing techniques to really get right. We'll discuss a lot of these later in the course. And we obviously can't talk about sound editing without discussing sound effects. There are two primary uses of sound effects in a fight scene. The first is to provide realism and texture to an otherwise sterile or bland world. Typically, we'll use Foley sounds to accomplish this. We expect to hear things like feet scuffling on the pavement, clothes being rustled and grabbed, and even human sounds like grunts. These types of sounds all help to add to the idea that what the viewer is watching is real, and the events are actually happening right before their eyes. The second and perhaps more obvious function of sound effects in a fight scene is to add impact to the various hits and other assorted fight moves. Since the actors aren't actually punching and kicking each other, you'll need to use sound effects to give it a realistic feel. Sounds simple, right? Well, let me tell you from experience that it's surprisingly easy to go wrong with this and end up with something that feels cheesy and slapstick like a cartoon, or even empty and boring like nothing's actually happening in the fight. This is where knowing the style and the tone of your scene is really going to help guide you when making these creative choices about adding your sound to the fight. The tone's going to guide you in picking sound effects that will feel appropriate to the atmosphere and to the theme of your fight. Sound effects you'll need for any fight scene include a variety of punches, kicks, body hits, slaps, falls, and sometimes even bone breaks. You'll also need to make sure that you have a decent selection of sound design elements to sweeten the hits. Now, by sound design, I'm talking about things like swishes, suckbacks, and bassy hits. And there's a lot more that we can talk about later. Let me show you the difference between using a punch sound effect by itself versus layering in a few bits of sound design to really build it up. Now, keep in mind, you won't always want to do this. It totally depends on the style of the fight that you're cutting. If you're aiming for a hyper-realistic scene that's meant to feel like you're almost there and actually watching the person in the fight, a more minimal and true-to-life sound bed is probably the way to go. But if you're cutting on a big action film, where everything is meant to feel over the top and really intense, layering in a few extra sound design elements can really help you add impact to the cut. Alright, So here's a regular punch sound effect. Pretty standard punch sound effect, right? Not too cartoony, and just the right amount of crunchy bone impact and skin-on-skin contact. If your scene is supposed to feel realistic and minimal, just stop here because you're pretty much done. But now, check out what we can do to the same punch with a bit of extra sound designing. That's got a lot more impact, right? This amount of sound design and sweetening would not be appropriate for every punch during a fight, like we said. But it would definitely help to add some impact and intensity to some of the more devastating and powerful punches in a fight. Alright, let's take this a little bit further. What's it like when we add music on top of everything? When it comes to any edited piece, music has the power to instantly and dramatically change the tone and feel of a scene. What you consider a music bed could just be a bunch of atmospheric drones to give the scene a bit more texture and mood, like this. Or it could be a full song with its own rhythm and feel, which will have a direct effect on the pacing of your scene and the timing of your cuts. This brings up an important point when it comes to choosing music. Custom music is great, but expensive. Now, in a perfect world, you'd have a professional composer create a soundtrack to sync up with your edited picture after you've already cut the scene together the way that you like it. This is called scoring. Now, obviously, not all productions have that type of budget, and sometimes it just comes down to being a matter of how much time you have to get something cut together and out the door. Pre-made library music is often sufficient and much cheaper. It's definitely possible to cut together a fight scene with full sound design and music using pre-recorded library cues, which will usually cost a fraction of the price of getting a professional composer to custom make a soundtrack specifically for your fight scene. Music libraries such as High Finesse Music and Sound and Position Music both have extensive libraries of professionally composed music for just about any purpose, including fight scenes. We've provided some of the music and sound effects from these libraries for use during this course. Alright, now let's put it all together and look at a few examples. I want to show you the dramatic difference that sound editing can have on a fight scene. I've got a small section of the fight scene that we're going to be working with here. There's 3 versions. The picture is cut basically the same in each version, but the way that I edited the sound in each is substantially different. Now, in the first version, I've added just enough sound effects to give the clip a bit more texture and presence, just to help the viewer feel like they might actually be there, close to the action as they're watching it. We'll call this version Basic Sound Effects. Take a look. Alright, so that's the first version. Simple and effective, and a totally viable option if that's the effect that you're going for. Now, in the second version, we have the same section of fighting with the same sound effects and Foley that you just heard, but now it also has a couple layers of sound design on top of everything. In this version, we've added things like bassy hits, swooshes, and drones. We'll call this version Basic Sound Effects plus Sound Design. Here we go. Alright, and the third version is again the basic picture and sound effects as the first version, plus sound design, plus music. Take a look. Pretty cool, right? So in all 3 examples, it's the same basic picture cut, but each has a completely different feel just by changing the way that you edit the music and sound. You'll need to be well practiced with these skills and aware of your sound editing options when it comes time for you to cut together your own fight scene. In this lesson, we learned a bunch of sound editing tips that we can use while editing our fight scene. First, we discussed the impact of different tones and styles. Then, we took a look at various types of sound effects and the roles that they play within the context of a fight. Next, we discussed different ways of approaching your music choices. And finally, we looked at a few side-by-side examples of the impact that sound editing can have on a fight scene. Coming up, we're going to start preparing to edit together our fight scene. We'll begin by creating a project and importing the exercise files. See you in a bit.